folks, this is going to be a fantastic podcast. We're talking about empowerment, but today in particular, we're talking about mental health and mental well-being with Maria Halphen from Meeting for Minds. But she's way more than just Meeting for Minds. Maria, thank you so much for agreeing to be on our Everyday Empowerment Institute podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's just very exciting.
Wow, look, she's got an accent. You can pick that up, folks. So we're going to hear about that shortly. Maria, we met via the beach down at Cottesloe. You're down there in the mornings meditating and doing a whole range of things. And our good friend Jane put us in contact with each other. And so let's actually get into it. Maria, tell us the Maria Halphen story, because that accent clearly isn't Western Australia. So tell me the story and what behind you, creating living art installation. Please do not disturb. The Meeting for Minds. Tell me the Maria Halphen journey in 2 or 3 or 5 minutes.
Right. Okay. I don't know about the time limit there, but
okay.
I'll try.
It's all yours.
It's kind of complicated. I was born in Sweden. My parents moved here when I was very young, but I felt always that I didn't fit in because I'm not Australian, as you noticed. So I went back to Europe very early. I got married to a wonderful French journalist and lived most of my life in France. Then my mother passed away, and all my life I've been curious about the brain. Why do we want to go to the moon, but we don't even know why we want to go to the moon? What is going on in this brain of ours? The connection between brain and mind has always been my sort of like bête noire, if you like, something I always wondered about. So I could also say that I worked in the theater before I got married for quite a few years. So my background is mainly theatrical. I grew up on a farm in Sweden. So there is nature I love, and I love the fun of theater. And I think theater has to be a little bit everywhere. Art is key to our lives. So back to when I came here in 2010, I came back. I had become a widow, and I started to be with my mother, who I noticed had grown very old since I moved away. And I caught up with an old friend who I had not seen for 25 years. And I told her my very sad story of becoming a widow, appalling. And I think about it now after a long, long time of speaking only of myself. I said, "What about you, Susie?" And she explained in beautiful, simple words how she had lost her 20s. She didn't know what happened. Her parents, no one seemed to react to any of her calls for help, which were just calls of help we all do every day without really realizing that they are. Because putting words to our pain is something we don't do so well. We do strange things, but actually, it could be a call for help. Anyway, Susie, at the age of 28, was taken by police to Greylands, and she was told that she had schizophrenia. And when I heard that, I was devastated, because I had been, what a life she'd had. Her whole life was taken away from her, not only because of the illness, but also, as I learned through her, the way society deals with mental illness, how it's so, the stigma around it is just so huge. Today we talk more about it, and that's great, but we're still not doing much about it. So Susie and I started to dream, and we came up with the name Meeting for Minds, because that's exactly what needs to happen. And it actually happens every time we meet. Like when you and I sat down, Lee, the first time, it was just wonderful, because every now and again you get a soul and you connect. So it was so good. I mean, there's a reason for me being here today, and it really is lovely. I'm happy to be here. And Susie and I went along, and we created Meeting for Minds, and we wrote, well, Susie wrote, because I don't know people here so much. I know more now. But she wrote to a lot of people like Diana Warnock, who was a former member of Labour Party. And she came along straight away, and she said, "I love it. Yes, let's do it." And then Keith Wilson, who was the former Minister for Health, he also came along, although he admitted that he wasn't very big on balls, because our idea was to have a ball and raise awareness. We moved on from that very quickly, because the second thing Susie said was, science is hope. And being curious about the brain, we started with that. There you go. Do you want more?
Science is hope. So what are some of the things you've done? So Meeting for Minds therefore started as an organization or a network or a group in what time? And what have you done over that time? What are some of the events or the things that you've done? And what are you planning on doing with Meeting for Minds?
Yeah, so Science is Hope we started with, me curious about the brain. We thought the first thing to do is to look at what's being done around the world. We became a not-for-profit organization in 2013, and we held our first forum in 2014, where we invited basic science researchers from many fields, not because mental health, what is it? Where does it actually begin? And we found out through the years, it's everywhere. It has to do with your eating. It has to do with your environment. There are things that happen in the brain that are triggered by many different things. It's genetic also. So we invited basic science, we invited clinicians, politicians, and people with mental illness. And we had them all sit on panels together because there's no expertise less important than the other. And the voice of the lived experience is what we found then needed to be enhanced and how do you say that, helped. People with lived experience, their experience is not anecdotal, it's real, and it's got to be listened to. We did the first forum in 2014, then we were overwhelmed by the possibilities, but we said, okay, we're not sponsoring science because science should be sponsored, I think, by government and big industry, whereas private foundations like ours can start to set little side steps, things that nobody will invest in, but we believe in. So Synergies was created, which is the synergies between the lived experience of mental illness and research, brain and behavior research. And then we started to build the bridges, and we held another forum in 2016, again in Perth. Then in 2018, we opened in Switzerland, and we had a forum there where we launched a project called Synergies. Because I'm not Australian, I kept going back to Europe all over these last 10 years. And I set up Meeting for Minds in Switzerland because I wanted it to be there as well. I wanted it to be known and to test the ground there and see the differences, learn from each other, learn from how the Swiss deal with it and the French and that part of the world. And then we also went to Israel because the research there is very innovative. And they have an ethos I love, which is fail fast.
Fail fast. I like that.
Yeah.
I'm making notes here as you talk to I've got a page already of notes that you said some fantastic things. So Australia, Switzerland, Israel,
France,
and France. I see on the website France as well. How did that unfold in France?
Well, that was because of my late husband. Because I wanted, when you still say someone's name, they're not dead. So Philippe Halphen is very much alive. He's here with me all the time, but Beautiful. He's also now part of the Academy of Science. We give every year a prize to innovation in psychiatry. And I'm very excited to go back this year because I haven't been there for 2 years. And we've got some very impressive psychiatrists that we have been supporting, and they don't get a mention in, of course, the Academy of Science because it's clinical research. It's not science, they say, but they need to be there. They need to be recognized. And this research needs to be promoted much more. We need to understand.
Fantastic. I mean, as you just said, we're Everyday Empowerment Institute in the sense that we want, what do people do every day to give power to, and you've used the term already, overwhelmed with the possibilities. What do we do to empower the possibilities? And obviously, as you say, a lot of what you're doing is in and around the clinical and the mental illness side. And I'm not saying we're more in terms of how do we optimize, in fact, the word wellness. Someone is not ill, they're surviving, but not sick. But how do we optimize mental wellness, mental well-being? And obviously, mental well-being is critical to business well-being, community well-being, economic well-being. And so we talk about an empowering ecosystem. And I suppose if you went back and I'm sure therapists do this, is people who've ended up with mental illness, you go, what was the ecosystem they grew up in that might have facilitated that particular condition? Now, you already know our mutual friend, Neil Cole. Neil, as you know, he and I were at Medley Hall together in Carlton in university, at Melbourne University days. And Neil eventually was in Parliament and stood up. And in fact, he said to me, he came over here in about 1983 and he had a tattoo on his arm. And I said, what the hell? Because he's not the kind of guy that would get a tattoo. He said, I had 3 days where I just blacked out. I went, what? I thought, what the hell? He doesn't even, I don't remember him even drinking. So that would be a massive drinking spree for him to go on and get a tattoo. Like you know, you think like a guy in the Navy is in a port and drinks a lot of rum and ends up with a tattoo, wakes up. But no, Neil had some kind of breakdown. Some people say, is it a breakdown or is it a breakthrough? But he said, and I discovered I had bipolar. And he said, therefore I had to go on medication for bipolar. And I mean, I thought back and I went, boy, I remember times, and I've had this discussion with you, that Neil and we'd talk, and I'd feel down after talking to him, because it was like, oh, that's no good. And I often say, this is positive. And he'd go, oh, no. I go, what the hell? This is exhausting me, this conversation. And of course, I never really saw him in any manic state, but clearly as time went on. But anyway, his Labor Party colleagues said, mate, once the opposition find out you're bipolar and you're on medication, there's your political career destroyed. He said, well, get stuffed. I'm going to stand up in Parliament and I'm going to announce this, and to help with it. And as it worked out, hundreds and hundreds of people said, thank God someone's fine. Because this would have been, well, I suppose it would have been in the mid to late 80s. I can't even remember when it was that he did that. And as you say, the stigma around mental illness was incredible. And so then Neil, it would have been in the 90s, he said, by this stage, this is way before Beyond Blue, he said there was a program or a research project, Depression Awareness Research Project. He said, what we found was there was so much stigma. People are so afraid to mention they're having problems. He said, if you had a broken arm or a broken leg, you can go to the hospital and you can talk about a broken arm, but if my mind or my brain's not working well, oh God, don't talk about that, which is just ridiculous. And of course, as you know, Neil then went on to be an award-winning playwright and did a magnificent play on Dr. Cade, who was the fellow that by chance discovered the power of lithium. You remember?
Yeah,
so it's a great story, and Neil did a magnificent job with the play. And as he's done, and even as this year was over in Edinburgh at the festival. But coming back to this mental illness, it's like, as you say, we've gone into outer space, but we know more about outer space than we do about inner space, particularly in regard to the brain and behaviour. So a critical part of what we do at Everyday Empowerment Institute, and my business partner Gary said, look, it's all very well, Lee, talking about management, leadership, sales, business growth, but if you're not giving people the tools to understand their own mind and how to optimize their own mind, body, spirit, mind, body, energetics, then you're not truly empowering people. You're floating. In fact, when your business partner says you're water skiing across the surface of life, that's a bit cruel, but it's true. If we're serious about empowerment, it really is about, let's help people understand and explore the inner space.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things you do with groups of people? And I know, well, let's just explore. What are some of the things you do with groups of people to help people understand and explore this inner space and develop mental well-being?
So developing mental well-being is just so much what I'm hoping to get much more done with, because what we started was science and understanding the brain. But when we built the Synergies project, which is bringing people with lived experience to the lab to meet with a researcher, they meet every 6 weeks and they sit for an hour and they chat. There is a little bit of an agenda just to know that we're going to learn about the glial cell or about funding or about the ethics. but there is also a lot of just bonding. And these researchers, who are world-class researchers, sit there and all of a sudden they're talking about all sorts of personal things. And it becomes a friendship. And we had, when we started in 2018 in Switzerland, we had one project, which is epigenetics of trauma. And she said, but I don't know anything about mental illness. That's not my thing. And he said, that's just it. Just talk to these people. You will discover something. And one of the girls was very frightened. She didn't want to be filmed. But after a year of being filmed and being part of this project, she felt so empowered. She said, can I go to a conference on on epigenetics of trauma? And she was not only the person with mental illness, but the only lay person who attended. And that is what we're hoping to do, is you have something inside, like Susie lives with schizophrenia, but what you can actually discover is that your problem is also something really interesting, and you can learn more, and you can actually be of help to others who are more unwell than you. So empowering people with mental illness to see their mental illness differently is one of our approaches. Then you talked about that thing, sitting on the beach. That's also, it's much further down the line from the brain and the basic science we work with, but we realize and we know that if you just sit quietly and let the noise go and come and be part of nature, it is very important for your health, your mental health and your well-being. And having no technology, but meeting face to face and simply just sitting and then going for a swim and a coffee, that is very, very healthy. And yeah, that's one thing I'm very happy we do.
Well, I mean, straight away, a few things there. During COVID, as I said to you, I got more and more listening to Sadhguru, in terms of meditation and the whole, as immersing myself, even the other day, listening a number of times to the autobiography of a yogi, and the whole, the fact that the Indians have been in and around, or probably not just, the Indians, I associate it with India, but have been doing this, studying, I didn't even know what the word existentialism was, but how human beings exist and how do you optimize this thing called existence from birth to death. You talk about this incredible piece of architecture called the human body, but again, this thing that sits between our ears called the brain, and then they talk about the mind and the intellect, and the yogis have sat in caves and if you spend 10,000 years doing something, you're going to come up with some pretty good stuff. And in their case, the power of, as you say, sitting quietly and then literally concentrating on the breath, going in through the nostrils, filling up and of course they've spent, again, let's say 5,000 years at least. What the hell happens if you alter your breathing patterns? Well, a whole lot of stuff goes on internally, which is, whether I'm doing work with sporting teams or executives, sporting teams, I've helped our National League water polo team. I said to the boys, okay, when the score is 10-all and there's 2 minutes left in the game, I literally want you to just concentrate on the breath. It's not, oh my God, what if we win? What if we lose? What if we step up? It's like, no, as soon as you concentrate on that breath going in through the nostrils, nothing else, you can't think of anything else. And you come back down and center. And what we know from high performance is a thing called the Yerkes-Dodson curve, which is if you need a certain level of excitement to perform at your peak, but if you're too excited, you go out of peak performance zone. So in most cases, when the score is 10-all, you're over-aroused. When you start making silly decisions, you start thinking thoughts, you're jumping too far ahead. Come back to the now. And again, the Indians talk about this, the dead past, the imagined future, the now, the present. And of course, what you're doing on the beach is coming to the now, which of course, as the Indians say, there only ever is the now. The past is dead. So why spend too much time there? Learn from it and move on.
Yeah.
And the imagined future, in most cases, people are catastrophizing their future versus, well, if we're going to imagine a future, let's actually imagine the future as we'd like it to be. But what we know about most people is they'll spend more time imagining their next holiday than they will a healthy, prosperous, happy future. You know, whereas say the Buddhist, in Buddhist, the Buddhists talk more about happiness. I want you to be happy. I want you to have peace. I'm not saying others don't, but most people don't spend enough time. What does happiness look like? You know, all of that for me. And then the other thing you're talking about here, which is so important, and you talk about, Maslow, is at the area of self-actualization is I'm going to have a cause bigger than myself.
Yeah.
The moment I focus on others and helping others and take the focus off myself, my world changes. And I was literally talking to young Doug at swimming this morning, and what's the guy's name? Anthony Kiedis of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. There's just one example, a big thick book he wrote called Scar Tissue, and he talks about his trouble with drugs and alcohol, but he wrote the book on really once you got involved with Alcoholics Anonymous and you're there to help others recover, his world changed.
Yeah.
You know, and to a certain extent, that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, Neil, with his own issue, he's become a massive advocate for mental health. And as soon as the focus is taken off yourself, your world changes.
And you know what that is? Yeah. Sorry, I just have to, before I lose that thread.
Yes.
The biggest enemy within the world of mental illness is self-stigma. And what Neil does is he's destroying his self-stigma, which means he's putting himself out there. So I've got schizophrenia, I've got a broken leg, all that is the same. We've got to change this attitude.
Yes, yes. And one of the things that I learned from Sadhguru is he talks about the intellect is a cutting instrument. In that he goes, so when you say to someone, would you like a sharp intellect or a blunt intellect? Most people will say what?
Sharp?
I want a sharp intellect. So what we do with our intellect is when we take something, whether it be a frog or a problem or a business or a market, we want to cut it up. We go, if we cut it up, we'll understand it better. And in fact, my good friend Peter Simons, who was a vet who had a brain aneurysm, and because the doctors were testing every 2 hours to wake up, he said, okay, forget it then. If you're going to keep waking me up every 2 hours, I won't sleep. Which that in itself, you go, that clearly is a brain not functioning too well by that stage where you go, because he's got a super sharp intellect and he wanted to think about it and think, and okay, if they're going to do that, I'm not going to. And it's like, and of course, eventually he ends up with depression. In fact, what we're doing, he said, Leo, I need to go for a walk with you and talk with you because something's going on. And he's essentially babbling to me. And I, with a background in physical education, I said, well, because you're saying, well, I'm not sleeping, and I'm not getting any sleep. And then I had to do this speech the other day and I had an anxiety attack. I mean, what the hell? I couldn't even imagine, didn't even know what an anxiety attack was. And I said, well, maybe if you swam more, that would tire you out and you would then sleep. He only admitted years later that I was actually hoping that if I swam hard enough, I'd have another aneurysm and I would die because I was in so much pain. I went, what the hell? What's all this about? So when Neil brought this depression awareness research project to us and said, well, clearly something's got to be done to actually raise awareness because a malfunctioning brain, particularly a highly intellectual malfunctioning brain, and this is what we see, people cutting themselves to pieces mentally.
I was saying the cries of help, they are all around us.
Yes. And so, I mean, these days he does yoga and he does meditation and a whole range of things. But this looking inwards, and of course, in his case, when one of our doctor mates said, well, look, if you're not sleeping, you're not producing enough serotonin and dopamine. And in the absence of serotonin and dopamine, you're living on adrenaline and noradrenaline, and therefore you're tense, you're getting angrier, which I'd seen him, snap and just go, what the hell was that? That's just crazy. Well, because this is the other thing the Indians say is a sharp intellect on an unstable emotional base. They've got cutting instruments on an unstable emotional base. So what meditation does is bring down the trigger points to have a more stable emotional base, which, so, I mean, I'm a big advocate now these days of if we're serious about empowerment, we say there can be no real empowerment, true empowerment, without financial empowerment. It's like the other day we're doing work with a company, and the company said we want to empower the people, and they couldn't even buy a $10 rubbish bin without head office approval. Go, hang on, you guys are not serious about empowerment, let alone we talk about, financial empowerment of women. It's only in the last 20 or 30 years, women have been able to actually kind of get bank loans, which is just ridiculous. Whereas really? you guys, well, in some of you guys, I don't know if I mentioned it the other day, one of my friends, Lisbeth from Denmark, said that I think it was about 1814 when the King of Denmark said, we're only optimizing 50% of our economic potential. What are you talking about? Well, we're only educating the boys to age 14 or 15, but girls we don't care about. So we let them stop going to school at whatever age. He said, I want the girls to be educated to at least age 15 as well. So this is way ahead of the rest of Europe. And so by the turn of the century and beyond, there are female lawyers, doctors, professors, politicians, the rest of Europe. And this came out of a conversation. I was talking with my good mate, Clive Bracey, about 10 years ago, and his daughter, he said, my daughter, Lucy, is the first female in the Bracey family to graduate from university. And Lisbeth said, well, that's not uncommon in England, that's true, that because they didn't get the women being educated until about, 1915 or 1920 or whenever it was.
Afghanistan, girls aren't allowed again to go back to school. So we're always talking about the developed countries. We're missing out on the whole of Africa and so many other countries, which makes me think of when I've been to conferences talking about the solutions around mental illness and what can we do. I'm always saying, let's look at what they do in India. The first thing they did in India, they started to lock up pesticides. And if they are only under lock and key, suicide rates dropped incredibly.
Yeah.
There are these cheap little solutions poor countries use because they have no money to throw at anything that actually really work if we use a little more common sense.
Absolutely. I mean, you're right. And again, Sadhguru is talking about saving of the topsoil, because in the absence of topsoil, the desertification, turning the joint to desert, there are simple things that can be done to save the soil. And essentially, we come from the soil, we eat the food from the soil, we're going to end up back in the soil. So let's do some. And he said there are simple things that they've done which have improved productivity, but also improved the organic content in the soil. Talk about empowerment. We have another fellow. He runs a charity in Ethiopia, and the kids had learnt how to essentially put some kind of sand to filter the water because the water was so filthy and people are dying of all sorts of terrible, but a simple process in terms of, I think it was some kind of sand approach, filtering the water, and all of a sudden people are not dying from how dirty the water is. So talk about empowerment. There's so many different ways to empower. Of course, that's in the physical world. And that's what we at Everyday Empowerment Institute, we say we want whole of person, whole of business. We want to be working internal world and external world. As you mentioned, building the bridge there before, building that bridge between internal world and external world. But again, our traditional education doesn't talk about any of this stuff. Which talk about traditional education, essentially we talk about is very Germanic. Put the kids in behind desks and get them smart enough so that you convince them getting a job is where it's at. And
good little worker.
Be a good little worker. Do as you're told. Please do not think for yourself. The last thing we want is you thinking for yourself, because that will upset the apple cart in terms of the status quo. So we've got so much. You also used the term synergy. One of our heroes and mentors is Buckminster Fuller, who coined the term synergy, synchronized energy, aligned harmonics. Are we all on the same page here? The energetics of us. And the beautiful thing you're doing, as you say, is when you get people in the same room. You're reminding me, years ago, I was doing some work with Bayswater City Council, one of the local councils here, and we wanted to go, what can we do to provide better services it was essentially a customer service program, but it was not just customer service. It was literally going, how do we transform the organization? It was an innovation program, which is, innovation, generating ideas so that we move to the next level and the next level. And traditionally people say, well, let's survey the ratepayers. I said, no, let's not survey the ratepayers, because in my head I knew we say empowerment, energy in motion. Let's get ratepayers in the room, 3 or 4 or 5, and I want members of the staff of the council will all be in the room together, and we'll say to these people, who are you, and what do you think could be done to improve the way this council operates? And I'll never forget one particular day, there was a fellow in the room who was an in Australia, in the Second World War, there was a group called Z Force, and these people are like commandos, SAS, so they went behind the enemy lines. So they're behind the enemy lines, and then they start, you can imagine the levels of bravery and courage required to be. So here's this guy, by this stage he's probably in his mid-70s or early 80s, and he's saying, he wasn't bragging about being a member of Z Force, someone else might have introduced it, but he's saying, well, what's happening here is we're all in our like old people home, retirement village, and we're watching television with my 80-year-old wife in the front room, and somebody's broken in to our bathroom, and we go to the bathroom and here's this person stealing and ransacking our house, and we need some protection. Now, when you hear an 80-year-old Z Force member saying, we're at threat. Now, you can put that in a survey, and what impact would that have had? Well, that's no good. When you feel it, when you feel the vibration and the emotion, we say emotion, energy in motion. Bayswater City Council were the first to get private security firms going through those areas to protect those people. And of course, crime goes down. Now, people, you can't do that. No, that's never been done before. But the commitment that came out of that room because of the emotion generated, which is exactly what you're doing, when you get the researchers in the room and the people with lived experience, and the lived experience person emoting, that researcher goes to a whole other level of understanding and commitment. Talk about empowerment. Something harmonically and synergistically happens when you do that. So, what a great, I would say, the metaphysics of what you're doing there, Maria. What are your comments? I mean, I'm doing too much talking. It's your interview. How does that resonate with you, what I've just said?
But you're so interesting. I love it. Now, when I was thinking about, there are 2 things that came to mind when you were speaking. One of them is that the thing that I think is the most beautiful about synergies is that these researchers, they have a process, and we don't care about the outcome. The outcome will be what it'll be, but it's the process. It's that journey we go on with the researcher, which means that whether they fail at the end or they succeed, that whole process is not lost. The learnings and all the things that made it a failure are not lost, because who the hell is going to read the millions and millions of papers that are published every year? The publish or perish is a killer for scientists. And here you can follow it. It's a little 3-minute film. You've got a few of them, and you will capture what's going on. And I think for the people with lived experience, they come back and they sort of slowly understand and really become quite knowledgeable within that field. And also the complexity of the brain and the mind, because people with mental illness, of course, like everybody, want to be cured. But when you start to learn about the complexity, it's not because science doesn't want to do it or they're not trying. It is so complex. We are such beautiful creations, and we are connected, as you speak of, the earth, the soil, the wind. All those things impact our mental health. And this you need to understand, and people aren't anywhere near understanding the beauty of us and the complexity. I'm hoping that in time people will, through these films, through any media I can find, is to actually embrace the difference and to actually enjoy that and see that you are unique. And sure, you've got some problems. Who the hell doesn't? We went to meet a very famous artist in Israel, and I should remember his name, but I can't right now. But he lived with his schizophrenia, and he was that was his that was him. That was his persona. And we went to his house, and he had painted every millimeter of that house. The ceiling, the walls, the taps, the handles, everything. And he said, I don't want to be cured. Who the hell are you to come in and say that I should change? I am me. Sure, I've got problems and it's not easy. And we could see that. But that was him. And I will never forget that man, because he was curious to come and learn about what it would look like inside his brain. Sure. So he could get to that, because we're not about curing. Of course, there may be cures, but you don't know what it's going to look like, and you don't know where it's going to come from. We want to break down the silos, and we want people to come along on the journey, understanding just a little bit more. Then I thought about something you said about the security out in Bayswater. And yeah, I would ultimately like to think there again that we will not have the situation where you need security and you don't need walls. They don't really work. The more laws and the more walls we put up, like in Israel, like in many other places, the more devious people become to get over them. If we take away some of the pressure, maybe people can actually calm down and go for a swim.
No, well, absolutely. I mean, interesting. The beautiful, it's interesting because a couple of years ago with one of my clients, I did a tour of a whole range of countries, it was everything from India, Japan, Korea, Thailand, Malaysia, a whole range of places. And what I saw obviously in India, it's got its own problems, and in fact, and the Sadhguru says, the British were in here for like 200 years raping and pillaging the joint. So there are continents. You go to London, and there's half of our artifacts in London. So, but there's rubbish, and the same in Indonesia. Plastic bags. Whereas you go to Japan, you go, the Japanese have the same bodies, the same brain, but literally there are almost no rubbish bins around, because within the culture is you do not leave a mess.
Yeah.
You take home your own rubbish, to the point where at the end of a soccer game or a football game, people go and pick up their rubbish. And I said to my Japanese client, I said, what is that? How do you indoctrinate a culture? Like, I literally gone to this other, there's plastic and rubbish everywhere. And he said, well, the bird does not soil its own nest before it leaves. What?
Yeah.
Why would you do that? But so here we are. So it's one thought, one driving belief that can literally change, transform. I mean, it's not dissimilar to the King of Denmark. One signature, one thought changes the whole ball game. And so whether it be politicians or teachers or parents, it's like, mate, those thoughts you put in people's heads make a massive, massive difference. Let alone another thought in Japan was the thought of reverence for the moment.
Yeah.
Reverence for the moment. Where the hell, who told us? No one told us about that. Reverence for the moment. You and I here right now. You go, this moment won't happen again. So we celebrate.
I'm totally here. Are you here?
I'm 100% here. So that's why I'd read a book once, How to Do Business with the Japanese, and this whole thing around when you get the business card, it's a ceremony.
Yeah.
Because this moment will never happen again. And so when you buy a shirt, or you buy a jacket, or you buy even a coffee, even the way they present your credit card to take payment. This moment your life is different when you go, this moment will never happen again. We have reverence for the moment, as to think, what's next? What's that? So these are beautiful driving, I would call them empowering beliefs, that when you live them, and of course, I was literally talking to a guy yesterday, he said he reads a book a week. So he reads 50 books a year. So when you start to expose yourself to new knowledge or new ways of thinking, whether it be autobiography of a yogi or whatever, the Sadhguru's book, Karma, or any of if you did a book a week, what that would do for, thinking.
Yeah.
And particularly if it's in regard to how do I help others? With this? So in your case, Maria, what I love to do with this is get inside the mind. What do you do? I mean, clearly, as you say, you lost your husband physically, at least, years ago. What do you do on a daily basis to empower yourself to live your best life?
Okay, so number one is sleep. I really, really struggle, but I do get usually at least 6 hours.
Mm-hmm.
That's very important to me.
What time do you go to bed at night?
12.
12. Okay. And what time do you get up?
6.
Okay, good. These are such basic questions because it's interesting in terms of people's lives. What time they go to bed? It's like it's almost like those times in themselves are interesting, But anyway,
Sure.
So you go to bed at 12 and you get up at about 6. Okay, what happens then?
I go to 12 because I work a lot with Europe, and they wake up at 3 in the afternoon, so they don't see why I'm not chirpy at 9 at night. It's sort of hard. Yeah. And then I try to go swimming every day or running. That's my absolute must. And then I meditate for 20 minutes if I can. The time is short. I mean, I managed to pack a lot into my days. Sure. I'm very ambitious.
Yes. Well, let's just talk about that as well. In terms of ambition, what drives Maria Halphen? What motivates? If you're ambitious, what drives you?
The endless possibilities.
The endless possibilities of what?
Of all the things that I can see that I could do, I could add to. I'm not going to change the world, but I can change little things, nudge here, do this. And in every sort of area now, I see how everything could be better. And I think about the people around me. I'm more focusing on the immediate circle I have around me, because I know that if you can help 1 or 2 people, the ripple effect is endless.
Yeah.
So it comes, I'd like to have people come and eat properly. So food is important. I like to have people at my table because I think it's nice for people to get together. A lot of emails. I think it's also, I take every day, I make sure I have time to listen, to learn.
Listen to what? Listen to what?
Listen to people.
Yeah.
Listen to thoughts. Sometimes listen to music. But listening, take time out, and then also process that. Don't sort of be like when you're on the tennis court and the machine is shooting balls at you and you're just going that way. Then you're just in survival mode intellectually, and it's not good for you.
Yep. And what about reading? What's your reading program or listening to podcasts? Tell me about that.
So podcasts, I would love to, but I never seem to find them. And I'm always either driving or running or doing something. So I don't have time. But I've got a pile of books I'm reading at the moment. So this is The Crowd. It's written by a French philosopher man whose name was Gustave Le Bon. It was written about manipulating the crowd, studying of the manipulation of the crowd, because I think today we are in danger of global manipulations. Mm-hmm. And I think TikTok and many others are fun, but they're actually also not very good for us. We need to understand it's a tool. It's not a lifestyle at all. Nice. So this is the beginning. And it was, interestingly enough, this book was written in French. It was translated very early, 1900 something, on the bedside table of Hitler, Roosevelt, de Gaulle, Churchill, Mussolini. They all had this book on them.
Whoa, that's an incredible piece of software in that book then. It's obviously,
and it's very skinny. It's doable, right? I haven't read it much, but I'm just getting into it. Then I'm reading a French author. He is one of the winners of the Philippe and Halphen Prize in Paris. And it's called Les Vacances de Momo Sapien. It's a play on words, and it's the history, a little bit of the genetic evolution of the Homo sapien, but making him, Momo makes him a little more friendly than Homo.
Fantastic. More. Give me more.
This one is a real good one.
Secrets behind chronic and mystery illness and how to finally heal. Nice. Yeah. Wow.
And it's about self-empowerment, and this guy, I think healing wisdom that we should all read about, because actually we can't hand over all the power to doctors either. We need to take care of our bodies, and we probably know more about our bodies than anybody else. We should. So Anthony William, a definite read. And then last one, but there are lots more, but this one, Losing Our Minds, What Mental Illness Is Really and Isn't. It's by Lucy Folks. And it was given to me 2 days ago by someone who lives with mental illness. And she said, this is very, very important to read.
Wow. So just on that, your reading program, I mean, again, because we say leaders are readers, this is a well-proven principle. If we talk about empowerment, leaders are readers. So when do you read? Do you read in the morning or lunchtime or in bed at night, or when do you read?
When I can. Right. I have no structure in that way. Because of these last 10 years of travel, I really have lived in airplanes the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. It would have, everything has to be, even my meditation can be on a plane. Mm-hmm. And I just tell my neighbors that I'm going to be zoning out for a while, and I hope you don't mind. And reading the same at airports, in bed, in the morning.
Fantastic. So talking of meditation and down the beach, just let's tell our listeners and viewers about that program that is down the beach and what you're doing there. And of course, you mentioned food. So I'd like you to share both of those programs and what's happened, and also mention the film you've got going as well.
Yes, Pieces. You have a little thing over there about that. Uh-huh. I will start with the beach, 20 Piece. It's on Instagram. It has its own website. No, it doesn't. It's on our website. It's Meeting for Mind's latest activity. It started with uni students who came to Perth who didn't have any friends, and they were working as volunteers for us. And so we meet every Tuesday morning at 6:30 on the beach at North Cottesloe, where you swim.
Yes.
And we sit there for 20 minutes, everybody quiet. And then afterwards we go for a swim for those who want to. And then we go and have a coffee and we catch up. Some people want to talk about divorce or mental illness or a joke. It's absolutely free. People come back because they really like the crowd. People come back after a long time, but it's very open. And those who do meditate, but you don't have to meditate, because even that can be too hard for some people. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that's the one thing that I do every Tuesday morning. Then we have the film Pieces, which has been made by one of our directors. His name is Keith Wilson, I mentioned earlier. He has two sons. One is named Dan Wilson, and he lives with schizophrenia. His brother Martin grew up with his brother. He was deeply impacted, of course. And he became a film director. And 2 years ago, he was given $200,000 by a lovely organization called Helping Minds to make an in-house film of 20 minutes. He couldn't do that. He wanted to go all the way. He made a feature film in 5 days, and it's called Pieces. And it's pieces of lives of people who have mental illness. It is a very beautiful film. And as Keith said, for those who don't know about mental illness, they're whether carer or living with it, this is it. It was taken into Cinefest Oz. So we were down in Busselton because we put into the production after that to help Helping Minds. Meeting for Minds came along. Mm-hmm. And the film was fantastically well received. It's got good reviews I can share with you afterwards. And we will be doing our first screening on the 6th of October. Helping Minds and WAM, the West Australian Mental Health Organization, are doing a first screening. I can't tell you, I think it's at the Luna Cinema, but that you will find on their website. And Meeting for Minds is having a screening on the 10th of October, which is World Mental Health Day, hopefully at the Windsor, but that needs to be found up. And I'm also going to screen it in Paris at the Academy of Science for the members of the Academy and journalists. And then in Switzerland, in Lausanne, all in October.
Wow, big month. And as you say, October 10th, we're going to be doing a joint event down at Cottesloe where people will come either swimming with us and or meditating with you guys. We'll all get together and particularly be talking about, as you said, mental illness, mental well-being, optimizing mental health, and raising awareness, but basically saying, come and join us, come and see what happens when your mind, your body and your spirit are all engaged, particularly with nature and other human beings. I mean, Martin Seligman, who wrote all the books on positive psychology, said, the number one predictor of mental well-being was number of social connections. By literally bumping into other people and talking to other people, how it changes your state, changes your mental health. The other thing that I think we spoke about the other day, and you mentioned the term brain and behaviour, that was literally a unit we did in university at Melbourne Uni, brain and behaviour. I think it would have been 1975, 1976. We were literally, I don't know if we were cutting brains up, but we were certainly looking at brains. And at that point, all the papers we were reading, literally at that point, the knowledge was the brain is pretty much formed as the way it's going to be by about age 25. And so if something goes wrong, then, whereas of course we've since found that that's not true at all, that the brain is incredibly plastic, and neural pathways form and atrophy based on how you use the brain. So Hebb's law, the cells that fire together wire together, a bit like the muscle. So one of the motivational speakers, Tony Robbins, talks about, okay, most people have highways to hell and dirt paths to happiness. Goat tracks, because they spend more time focusing on the dead past or catastrophizing the future. And when you do that, of course, we now know you're going to get better and better and better at dwelling on the negatives of the past or catastrophizing the future, versus meditation and consciously imagining a positive future, and in many ways rewriting your past to go, well, what were the positives of the past? And I see even in the passing of your brother, your husband, of he's still here with me. He's still here with me.
Yeah. All the learnings from that time.
Yeah. And so you've framed it, and you've built that neural pathway. That's a far more empowering neural pathway than other neural pathways you could have developed. Sure. So, and that's what we say, conscious everyday empowerment. What are we doing consciously to build those neural pathways that are actually going to help us get where we want to go? Are we versus enabling the atrophy of healthy neural pathways?
Yeah. So I think Maria, it's a perfect match. Because
absolutely a perfect match. It's a perfect match. But I want you to also then talk about the thing you're doing with hospitality and food and mental health, because that's such a beautiful project that's so accessible and so scalable across not just Australia, but around the world. So tell us about that.
So it's actually part of the forum we're holding next year in May, where we want to bring basic science to people and help them understand that it's in everything you do. It's everywhere in your life, like music and the brain, and then food and the brain. Felice Jacka from the Deakin University in Melbourne is coming to speak. And from that, we thought, well, we should be serving that kind of food then in the forum. And from that, we started to say, but maybe we have to have that dinner, because every forum has a dinner, right?
Yeah.
And we spoke to the restaurant and they said, oh, yes, we'd love to do that. So the idea now is the forum is called World in a Brainstorm, and we are creating a brainstorm menu.
Oh.
So from the basics of high protein, vegetables, no sugar, we are going to invite chefs from everywhere, at least in Australia, but hopefully more, to have a brainstorm menu the month before the forum. And let's learn about good food. It can be delicious, and let's become more curious. You can see how you feel after a week of eating brainstorm menus.
Unbelievable. Well, we say you are what you eat. So, coming back to Neil with his meat pie at 10 o'clock in the morning and the choc milk, that's all very well, but everything from what the hell's in it, let alone to the sugar high and then the crash, all of those things, becoming way more conscious of that.
But there is one thing about that, because some people they can't help themselves. Neil at the time, he knew that wasn't right, but at that stage, it was all he could do. And what is more important even than what you eat is the attitude towards the eating, how you receive it. I'm not going to say blessed, but in a way, okay, it's helped me feel strong. I've got some energy. Maybe it was a little too much chocolate or too much meat pie, but that's okay. Because now I can go and do many other things, and tomorrow I'll do less. So let's not make it too hard for ourselves.
No. And I think, well, one, we know how addictive sugar is. I mean, one of my many or few sins is at Aldi, you can get German chocolate for only $2.99 a block, and it's just I'm doing my best to walk past. Well, what would one block hurt? Invariably, if it gets to 2 and 3 blocks, it's like, oh, but
Yep.
so, you know, it's like, it's addictive stuff. That's for sure. Maria, I really thank you for your time this morning, but is there anything I haven't asked you would like us to cover before we wind up this morning?
I think not. I think you've been very, very you covered most things, except just stay curious and keep asking more questions.
Right. You talk about self-actualization. You are so focused, as you say, on all of those possibilities of helping not only those who are having the lived experience, but clearly the researchers. And I love the fact, as you say, innovation in mental health, innovation in mental well-being.
Yep.
It's central to happiness and fulfillment, and certainly central to healing, the healingness of what's going on. So I want to congratulate you and honour you for the work you and your team are doing. And I look forward to us working together and seeing what we can do to continually empower people on an everyday basis to realise their full potential. I've read so many notes here. Talk about synergies. 1 + 1 will be 10 here, Maria.
Yeah.
And that's Buckminster Fuller will be very happy, as you say, like minds, the synergy of what's going on. So people can get in contact with you by your website, which is, what is it?
Meeting for meetingforminds.com. And there is contact at Meeting for Minds, which is the website to the email address. And that can be in French also, because we speak French, but we don't speak many other languages, sorry.
Well, that's not a bad start. English and French. I mean, you go to Spanish and a range of things at some point. Look, Maria, I look forward to us continuing our ongoing journey together to make as big a difference as we can on the time that we have here. And you're heading back overseas, I think, in October, doing all those great things you're doing. And people get to the film, get access to Meeting for Minds, come down the beach and join the group meditation. And I look forward to seeing you very soon.
Yeah, same. Thank you so much for inviting me. This has been wonderful. Inspirational.
Thank you, Maria. All the best.
Bye-bye.